Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Chrissy Raywalk, Director of Intercollegiate Athletics at the University of Delaware. One of the things that I appreciate and enjoy most about leadership is that it's a journey, not a destination. It involves lots of different twists and turns, and you need many different types of people to go along with you on your journey in order for it to be successful. So today, I invite you to start your leadership journey with this podcast. Enjoy.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Dr. Dolores Christensen. Dr. Christensen is the Assistant Director of Psychological Resources for OU Student Athletes, or the PROS Department there at Oklahoma. Greetings, Dr. Christensen.
Hi, Ty. Thanks for having me.
So you've been there at Oklahoma for this, I guess this is your third year in that program. You guys call it the PROS Department, correct?
Correct.
I'm looking at some of your career, played volleyball in undergrad, took an interest in mental health and the psychology, maybe of performance within athletics, and then realized there's a lot more to it than just performance. There's also the clinical aspect in terms of counseling. Went and got educated, master's, got your doctorate in counseling, and did some postdoc work, internships, UC Davis. You did your postdoctoral residency with the athletics department there. And now you are Dr. Dolores Christensen. I wonder if you could give us some insight into a couple things. But first, talk to us a little bit about the PROS department, the psychological resources for OU student athletes.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the ways that I think we can conceptualize the PROS department is we're the embedded counseling center that specifically serves the mental health and performance psychology needs of OU student athletes. So just like a counseling center, we provide individual support, whether that's mental health related, performance related, or some blend of in between. We also do our own ADHD and learning disorder testing. That's a really critical service that we offer student athletes to make sure they're getting accommodations if they need so or need some in school. But then we also are really involved at the team level, and that is just about building good relationships with coaches, athletic trainers. I work very closely in the multidisciplinary team to whatever we can do to help support student athletes' needs, that we want to be a part of that and help, whether it's helping them develop coping skills because school is really stressing them out, or feel more confident during games or matches, or working with the coach to help improve communication between a coach and an athlete. Any of that we think sort of falls under our wheelhouse.
I've had psychologists on before. I had Dr. Monique Marshbell from Baylor, and actually did an interview with her and Dr. Lakeitha Poole from LSU on mental health in college athletics and specifically their role. I've always wondered, when you talk about psychologists, you talk about counseling, about the debrief period, right? I mean, if the student athletes are anything like they are now from when I played almost 20 years ago, we all have things we're dealing with, right? And you come in and you play, and I know athletics, right? More than I know being a regular student. And having a place to talk about things is probably excellent, which I don't know if we had 20 years ago. I wonder about when students come in with a variety of things they are dealing with and talk to you and talk to the psychologist and people in the PROS department. How do you guys as a department debrief in terms of not bringing things home with you, but also knowing how important the things are that you do for others and having it on your mind and think about solutions for the student athletes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the big thing is, at least at OU, we're really lucky to work in this big team. So within our department, we have 4 staff members. We just hired our 4th staff member. And then we also have an internship program for folks at the end of their clinical training. They could spend a year with us. We have 2 interns. We have 6 people. And that really helps to distribute the work. So we're not feeling that burnt out, that overwhelmed of how am I supposed to help all of these student athletes and show up for them. So we're really lucky in that regard. But I think it's also that team I mentioned that we work with athletic trainers and nutritionists and strength and conditioning coaches and team docs, academic advisors, learning specialists. So it's never just us. And I think, at least for me, that's really instrumental to not take those things home, because I know at the end of the day, in that team environment, we're providing the best care possible for student athletes. It doesn't mean it's easy, but I feel really good about the effort that we put in to support them.
All the, let's call them stakeholders in the success of student athletes, right? Strength coaches, other administrators, nutritionists, everything, academic counselors. Do they reach out if they see something? Is that whole family or community of people, if they see something in a student athlete, do they reach out to your department? Hey, there's an issue here. Do they go directly to the student athlete? Do they talk to their coach? What is the whole structure or process for that type of situation?
Yeah, the short answer is all the above. So athletic trainers, it's our business is relationship based. So if anybody on staff has a concern about an athlete, I think most of the time they're just going to say, hey, you doing all right? Things seem off or you seem stressed, to that student athlete. And most of the time those conversations end there because the student athlete's saying, yeah, I have this big chem test today. I'm so freaked out about it, but it'll pass once they get past that test. But I think where we come in is if that becomes a pattern or a behavior, that student athlete is behaving so outside of what's expected from them, and where our relationship with those staff members becomes so important, because then they know, oh, you know what, I'm going to call Dolores. That just seemed off. And so I think that's where us working in that multidisciplinary team and I do the same. If I'm worried about somebody's over exercising or they're doing extra workouts and they shouldn't be, I'm going to bring in the strength coach and be like, hey, did you know about this? Is this cool? If the student athlete is consented for me to have that conversation. So I think, we lean on each other quite a bit, and that means that the student athlete hopefully isn't going to fall through the cracks because so many people are looking out from them and talking about ways we can support them.
Thinking back to the structure of the department on the website, I noticed there are 3 of you guys, but you also said you guys do have, and forgive my ignorance here, but I guess, are they internships or even residencies like the one you did at UC Davis? Or how do you break up the responsibilities of who handles what, when, where, how, just in terms of the structure of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, we have every year we welcome 2 doctoral interns. So they are folks who are at the end of their PhD or PsyD in clinical or counseling psychology, and you have to do that year-long internship. So every year we go through an interview and match process, and they come and join us. So they're under our supervision, and we have weekly individual meetings and group meetings to help make sure they're maintaining, good standards of care as newer folks in the field. But then I think down for us, we have a staff meeting every Wednesday. So we're checking in and talking with one another. We meet with our interns every week as well. So even though we're currently, in the COVID virtual world, I think we're still in communication with each other to talk about distribution of responsibilities. And some of it is hierarchical. Our director will take care of director-based things like budgets or talking to the athletic director or just different things like that. But then we all have specialty areas. So I am one of the co-coordinators of our interdisciplinary team that manages eating disorders. So that responsibility, falls under me. And then ultimately we have divided up our teams and serve as point people for various teams. Now that means the student athlete can see whoever they want on staff. So even if I'm not the point person for football and a football player wants to work with me, they're totally okay to do that. But what it means is that the staff member has really good relationships with those coaches, athletic trainers, academic advisors, and those folks know if there's an issue with softball, that coach is going to call me or the academic advisor is going to call me because they know I'm the one most connected with that team. So I think that helps distribute responsibilities as well.
People know exactly who to call, right, in terms of the situation.
Yep.
Yeah. Joe Castiglione is known for a whole lot of things in college athletics. I once did a video interview with him. It was a long interview because I had a lot of questions to ask. But in terms of trying to be innovative and developing leaders are 2 of the things that he's well known for. I mean, this thing goes back to 2004 with Dr. Nikki Moore being one of the first on campus when you were researching the job. Can you see the progress, the evolution of the department and where you guys have come from being the first in the country to where it is now? Here we're almost 20 years later from when it started, and the resources you provide. Can you see, or did you just show up like, this is great, let's go? Or, I mean, talk to me a little bit about just the department and the effectiveness in terms of the evolution of it. It's been around for a while now.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that, Ty, that Oklahoma has a reputation, at least within the sport performance psychology world, of being the first and being really well established. Like I mentioned, those relationships, I mean, they're almost 20 years in the making with coaches who have been here, academic advisors, or even when new people come, they get sort of indoctrinated into, hey, this is the pros department. This is how we do things when we're concerned about an athlete. And I think Joe's vision of seeing that that was going to be a need at the time when Nikki Moore was hired has only continued. As we know, one person can't do it all, or it's really difficult. And so to have a full staff and then to doubly invest in the future of sports psychology, to say, let's have an internship, that comes with a certain financial and time investment for Joe to see that vision and know, like, not only do we have one of the biggest staffs in the country, but now we're going to make sure that other places have people that they feel confident in hiring because they were trained here. So without a doubt, that reputation kind of precedes itself. And then when I was looking at jobs, it was very evident that that's how it's done. And I just really wanted to be a part of it. So felt like it was a good fit.
Right, exactly. Your background, you were educated in sports psychology and counseling psychology, right? Talk to me about why it was important. And it's important for people to understand the difference between performance psychology and kind of counseling and clinical psychology, and why it was important for you to be educated in both as you started your career.
Yeah, I think college athletics is a really good example of that. So the performance side would say we need our athletes to be optimal, high functioning people when they're on their playing surface, court, field, whatever it happens to be. And so performance psychology would be, what are the things that they need to have that? The self-talk, emotion regulation, attention control, those things where somebody's probably doing pretty well, but we're trying to take it to the next level. And certainly within the Big 12 and some of the spaces OU teams compete in, those differences are the difference between a national championship and being a runner-up. So that's sort of the performance psychology side of things. And then the mental health, counseling, clinical side of things is maybe things aren't going so well. A lot of stress, difficulty sleeping, partner broke up with you, substance use, eating disorders, just overwhelming anxiety or feeling depressed. And that comes down to a mental health thing. And that has to come first and foremost. Not very many people can have those experiences and still perform optimally. That at some point, that mental health is going to send a strong signal of, hey, we got to do something about this. So I think for me, I didn't want to have to try and kind of choose one or the other, because I think ultimately our athletes are doing both, right? They come in and say, well, coach and I aren't getting along, and say, okay, we'll talk about communication. That's kind of straightforward. But then it's like, well, I'm also really homesick and I want to major in X, Y, and Z, but my parents want me to major in A, B, and C. And how do I communicate that with my parents and feel good about it? And so it's like, there's so much more than the person they are when the jersey's on. And so the sport, and performance mental health side of it means whether you have the jersey on, off, you're an OU student athlete, you're a person first and foremost. And we're going to take care of that person. And probably in taking care of that person, the performer is going to benefit as well.
And it sounds like you understand that those things are related. There might be a separation in terms of educational and career process and destination, but inherently in terms of working in college athletics, those two things work hand in hand.
Absolutely. Yep.
So you're also on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Athletics Committee. I may have named the committee wrong, but you're also involved with that. Tell me about what that is for athletics there at Oklahoma, and is there any interaction with, which I'm sure Oklahoma has a similar committee for campus in general?
So yeah, our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Subcommittee is one of the subcommittees on our all department staff council. And that was formed a couple of years ago when Armani Dawkins joined our staff. And it's really focused on staff and coach education, initiatives, projects, service opportunities. And so we work very closely with the student athlete side of things. But in my role as chair and the awesome committee that we have, we're always thinking about how can we educate coaches? What are the areas that they can grow in? How would our staff respond to trying this, in the department? And obviously in COVID, we've had to be really creative around delivering educational opportunities via Zoom. And so one of the things that we have started to work towards that we definitely want to do more of going forward is to partner with our campus kind of colleagues, because they've got an amazing diversity, equity, and inclusion office. They work incredibly hard on campus. And so one small way in which we partnered with that is we recently had a 2-part training on how to support LGBTQ student athletes. And we had the director of our Gender Equity Center, Christensen, come over and do that training. And obviously a campus partner. She was very well received by athletics, great participation and turnout from our staff. So that's a way in which we know we have experts on campus So if we can pull them in to help interact and train our coaches and staff, we're going to try and do that first and foremost before we look for regional or national speakers to fill that same role.
Right. Now, earlier this summer, and I guess late spring, early summer, there obviously were probably some educating conversations that student athletes were having with administration amongst themselves, and administration having amongst themselves and with student athletes, in terms of seeing the frustration of really hundreds of years of just injustice towards people of color here in this country. And I wonder about you being the chair. I mean, it's like, this is what we made subcommittee for, so let's activate more than we've been doing. Talk to me about that time period in terms of the committee and what you guys did then and obviously continuing to do now.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think, under Armani's leadership, when they started the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Subcommittee, I wasn't on it yet. And they had done some amazing things just as far as developing a 5-year strategic plan, developing a monthly newsletter, and, trying to take these steps. And I think what we saw this summer after the murder of George Floyd was really a reckoning in our department of, are these things enough? And are they intentional and thoughtful? And are they part of a larger structure and belief system? And on one hand, I think on the surface, we could say, yes, of course, we value inclusion. We want our student athletes to be their full selves here. What we had to come to terms with and see was that it's still not enough. And they're telling us it's not enough and that their experiences could be better. And so, yeah, exactly as you've alluded to, Ty, the committee was then kind of thrown into overdrive in a good way, that there was such a thirst for knowledge. There were people who were scratching their heads, or saying, no, I've been thinking about this for a while, but what do I do and how do I support student athletes? And so that's where I think we, with the committee's work, and again, we're so grateful for the committee that we have, just a team of people who are really invested in this. We started to put on monthly webinars, and a lot of them in the beginning were based on racial justice, how coaches can talk to student athletes about this, how it shows up in the recruiting process. So the messages you're sending to student athletes right away before they even become a Sooner. And those were really well received by our head coaches and staff. And then from there, we started to broaden out into other areas, like I mentioned, working with LGBTQ student athletes. We're going to have a training next month on the identity of Indigenous peoples in Oklahoma, which is obviously a big part of our state's history that's often not told. So we see our role as maintaining education opportunities like that, developing really, we think, thought-provoking newsletter, a newsletter, that we send out every month that has a lot of links so other people can do self-paced learning. We also started the Anti-Racism Book Club this summer, which is a group, it's for athletic staff who really want to take their learning to the next level and dive even deeper into anti-racism knowledge areas and practices. And that's been a very cool thing. We started our second version this fall. And so just how we can be creative and responsive to making sure at the end of the day, we are serving our student athletes the best that we can. And I think as chair, that is my responsibility, is to make sure we're always turning back to the student athlete, even if our committee's role is staff and coaches. It's ultimately about our student athletes.
Yeah, excellent information. And it'll continue to evolve, especially with someone like you involved, with Joe involved in the department, constantly self-evaluating to make sure they're doing the things necessary to serve the student athletes. I have one final question and then we'll wrap. Thinking about that volleyball player, however long ago it was that you were when you decided you wanted to get involved with psychology and athletics, do you feel like you are accomplishing what you set out to accomplish? And what else would you like to accomplish in this field as you continue with your career?
Yeah, no small question there to end things.
That happens, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's a great one. And I think the first part of it is Oklahoma is absolutely my dream job. The structure that we have set up, the investment in mental health, the way that we do things here, like it is hard pressed for me in the way I like to work to find a place that does it anywhere close to OU. So I think that volleyball player would be like, okay, you live in Oklahoma, that's a surprise, but the job that you have there, it checks all the boxes, and so that is an absolute resounding yes. I think this idea of moving forward, I mean, there's a couple of things that come to mind. I'm really proud of the internship that we have in OU. It's called the Oklahoma Sports Psychology Consortium. And again, it's for folks who are at the end of their PhD or PsyD in clinical or counseling psychology. we're really proud of that and what it's become and what it could be, and just how it'll leave a really positive mark on our field, making sure people get good training to have jobs like this. So I'm proud of that. And then I think anti-racism work, there's such a need for it in sports psychology, and that's been kind of a surprise calling for me over the last couple of years, both just prior before I came to OU, but certainly been accelerated by the events here at OU. And I think that that's something I definitely want to continue. And if my name gets attached to that kind of work, that would be A-okay and fine by me.
Right. Excellent. Well, sounds like you've done an excellent job in the 2.5, I guess this is the third year you've been there at the program. And I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
That was Dr. Dolores Christensen. She's the Assistant Director of Psychological Resources for OU Student Athletes, or the Pros Department there at Oklahoma. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.